one of the coolest experiences I had, and we've got a picture of it up here in the GeekWire offices, is I said, hey, Steve, if we're going to be doing a podcast with you about numbers, there is no way that I'm not going to be doing an episode on the numbers of the NBA. And so I actually got to sit next to him for one quarter. He gave me one period.
That picture is phenomenal, too. I love the picture that came with that story.
Chatting with him on the sidelines at the Clippers game. The person that was sitting on the other side of him for that quarter was Dave Cutler. He is the father of Windows NT.
Right.
In the picture that we've got on the wall, he's on one side, I'm on the other,
That's
and
fantastic.
Ballmer is standing up in the middle of us, screaming.
Which was Ballmer most of every game.
Yes. Hi, and welcome to GeekWire from GeekWire.com in Seattle. I'm Todd Bishop, and I'm pleased to be joined here in the GeekWire offices this week by Mike Lewis.
Todd, it's not only great to be here as a GeekWire contributing editor.
Do you still hold that title?
Until you guys wrench it from me, I'm not going to give it up. I am going to identify myself as such and just sort of ride on the brand's coattails as long as I can.
I love it. So for folks who are not familiar with Mike, he is a longtime journalist, radio host, tavern owner. Mm-hmm. He is sometimes a caterer of GeekWire events, as he was.
Anything that just keeps the rent paid.
But Mike, you closely follow sports, as you would expect from somebody who owns a bar near Climate Pledge Arena.
Right.
And one story that really popped out this week involved former Microsoft CEO Steve Ballmer. And so that was the main reason I wanted to have you come in. But just to tease ahead for folks on the show, later on, we're going to be talking about a massive acquisition by OpenAI of a startup here in the Seattle region that frankly shocked me. It was the biggest surprise of the week.
I think it shocked a lot of people.
Yes, absolutely. And at the end, I'll be talking a little bit more about a landmark ruling this week involving Google in its antitrust case and the ironic twist that relates to Microsoft in that ruling. But first, Mike, there was a bombshell report out by Pablo Torre, who is a longtime journalist, independent journalist, formerly with ESPN. I knew him best as the host for many years of the ESPN Daily podcast. He had a report based on a lot of investigative reporting, digging into court materials, that Steve Ballmer, the former Microsoft CEO, and his NBA franchise, the Los Angeles Clippers, attempted to circumvent the NBA salary cap in a way that would enrich their star player, Kawhi Leonard, without running over the salary cap in a way that would be unfair to the other teams in the NBA. Mike, you followed this story closely.
Absolutely.
Can you give us your hot take on what this story is and what the real meaning of it is?
So first off, I'm a big NBA fan, and I got lucky because I grew up a Golden State Warriors fan, so I've had a nice run. And I've always rooted against the Clippers. No offense to Steve Ballmer, but Steve Ballmer, weirdly enough, is one of my favorite owners in all of sports. I love his level of enthusiasm and his complete level of commitment. However, this story has sort of shades of the Premier League, where one of the major teams in the Premier League, Manchester City, is going through a similar thing, that they routed money from other sources. I mean, this is... If you look at the way college athletics works, right? I mean, the coach at University of Oregon will get money from Nike as well as getting money from the school. In the NBA, there has always been this idea that if you're in certain markets, you're going to make extra money in terms of endorsements. Kawhi Leonard, in his day, one of the 5 best players in basketball, a player that Steve Ballmer coveted for the Clippers and managed to get to the Clippers, which was a huge coup for him because that immediately made the team a contender. Kawhi Leonard is nearing the end of his contract, and Ballmer gets the max extension that they wanted. But what happens after that is Ballmer he had already been an investor in this company, Aspiration. After they had gotten their deal, then Aspiration signed this, essentially what they refer to now as a no-show contract with Kawhi Leonard for an additional $28 million to do literally nothing, not even social media, not tweet, not anything. He didn't even retweet the stuff they did, no effort at all. The timeline looks odd to the outside, and I think that there's a strong inference that what the Clippers did was promise, if you will, verbal promise, certainly nothing that would be documented, that, hey, you do this for us, we will get you that extra 30 mil you want or extra 28 mil you want from a sponsorship deal in a company that Steve Ballmer is one of the biggest investors in. Now, Steve Ballmer has come out and said absolutely didn't happen. The timing is not exactly as the reporter said it was, but the denials have been conflicting and odd, and including the pullback from provably false to just didn't happen. They initially had said provably false, and now they've sort of backed it up a little bit into, you can draw inferences from the timing, right? You can draw inferences that, wow, they got their extension, then suddenly this it turned out to be a fraudulent company, signed a big deal with Kawhi Leonard. I don't even know if he's ever got any of his money out of it. Certainly, Ballmer is probably not going to collect the money he's invested and the money that they were supposed to pay him for a sponsorship as well. Ballmer's defense is that I got ripped off by these people, and the whole idea that we would go to them and have them pay salary that we didn't want to pay or couldn't pay under the league rules is false. Initially, he said provably false. It's not probably provably true or false unless you get some real smoking gun here, like an actual email saying, hey, the deal is, this company is going to pay Kawhi additional money.
This is so fascinating, and I think a lot of people listening to this podcast may have even worked with Steve Ballmer at Microsoft.
Yeah.
And so I think one thing we can do is bring a bit of a different perspective to this. Just knowing Steve Ballmer, at least from my perspective, having talked to him and interviewed him and co-hosted a podcast with him called
you know him pretty well.
Geek. And to me, the thing that doesn't square is that Steve Ballmer is actually an exception in the tech world in just how principled he is. And my first reaction to this was it seemed very out of character.
Right. And in fact, Mark Cuban said the same. He immediately tweeted out, like, Steve Ballmer's way too smart of a guy to do something this dumb. All of the owners in the league, in an odd way, owe Steve Ballmer a debt of gratitude. Because when he bought the Clippers for what was considered at the time twice what it was worth, he went in with a $2 billion offer. Now the franchise is worth even more than that. But he went in with such a high offer that every team in the league floated upward, right?
Yeah,
the value,
right.
He set the new bar for valuation of NBA franchises. They've all done quite well with having Ballmer associated in the league. And he's also the richest and potentially most powerful owner. And so I'd like to bring up one quick thing. If you folks are interested in following this issue, one of my favorite newsletters, sports newsletters, actually one of my favorite newsletters is Good Morning It's Basketball. A guy named Tom Ziller, a dynamite reporter. He has been following this issue closely, although he's doing a lot of sort of his own writing about it, as well as linking out to people who are doing the more in-depth reporting. And Tom Ziller said, it's going to be weird for the league to even investigate this because not only is Ballmer maybe the most important owner in the NBA right now, they've got the Olympics coming up in Los Angeles, and he's going to be a big, big player in that as well. And so what is the league going to do with the richest guy who is a popular owner in that town? A very popular owner. I love his passion for the game. I liked Mark Cuban too. I'm going to remain bummed that Steve Ballmer is not the owner of a Seattle franchise.
Yes.
I think everybody here probably should be bummed about that because he will put his money where his mouth is.
Mike, based on your reading of this, based on your experience in journalism, what do you think of the reporting and the rigor of the investigation that Pablo Torre did here? Did he go far enough to prove it, or did he go just far enough to make the allegation? So
this has always been the issue with investigative reporters. We both know this from our history, the gap between correlation and causation, right? And that's always the thing that's going to bite you. And I think he's got nice correlation here. He does not have provable causation. And that was not referenced. He did not roll that back enough in his own language talking about it that I think gives him safety. But I'd also say Steve Ballmer had every opportunity to respond when he heard this report and blew it off and did not respond directly to the reporter. And I think he could have done himself a world of good and really potentially recalibrated, because apparently he was contacted. No one's arguing that he wasn't contacted. He decided, I don't need to deal with this guy, or I don't know this guy, or maybe I don't like this guy, whatever it was. And because he didn't, this ran without Steve Ballmer talking about it. And I think that his defense that he subsequently has given since the story came out and since a lot of the sports world attention has been directly on him, he's made a legitimate counterclaim that no, this is while the timing may not look great, it isn't what the reporter says it is. And there's nothing here that says that we actually made some sort of tit for tat deal.
Steve Ballmer did an interesting interview with ESPN's Ramona Shelburne where he talked about this. So let's hear just a little bit of what he had to say.
Up front, I want to say one thing very clearly. We, the Clippers, have abided by the salary cap circumvention rules because that's the right thing to do. I happen, for what it's worth, to think it's a very important rule in terms of promoting competitiveness and equal playing field across the league. But whether I agreed with it or not, it's the rule. And we've absolutely abided by that.
It's a lot of money. I mean, 28 million, 7 million a year is a lot of money for a guy that you didn't actually require to do anything.
I don't know why they did what they did, and I don't know how different it is. I really don't. And frankly, any speculation would be crazy. These were guys who committed fraud. How would I be able? Look, they conned me.
You're one of the richest men in America.
They conned me. I made an investment in these guys thinking it was on the up and up, and they conned me. At this stage, I have no ability to predict why they might have done anything they did, let alone the specific contract with Kawhi.
I mean, you're one of the richest men in America. You've obviously done very well in your career in business. Like, you didn't smell anything wrong with the company. You didn't see anything wrong. Like, you obviously reviewed the financials before you got involved with the business proposal.
I reviewed, my staff reviewed primarily fraudulent financials. Now, should I have sniffed it out? Maybe. I feel embarrassed and kind of silly that I didn't sniff it out, but I didn't. Mm-hmm. I made the investment. A lot of other smart investors didn't sniff it out either. It's also true I've made a bunch of bad business deals and investments in my life, and I've made some good ones. This was fraud and a bad investment, and I'm embarrassed by that.
You know, one of the interesting things for me here is sort of seeing Ballmer in this different context, but it's very much the same Steve.
Yeah. And I think he makes a great point. I mean, I am personally rooting against any of this being true. One, the salary cap thing is something the league owners take so seriously because, can I say something as an aside about the salary cap? Please. I think it's very funny. It's odd how in England, the Premier League is always held up as this example of, it's the most expensive, most valuable sports league in the world. It's not even, it's probably 1 and 2 and 3. And then the NFL. And in England, where they embrace nationalized medicine, they embrace a form of capitalism because there is no salary cap. I mean, that is just like there's always going to be the 4 richest teams at the top and then everyone else. Where we don't embrace nationalized health as a form of socialism, we embrace socialism within our professional leagues, right? Because those are all about like salary caps and rewarding the least by giving them a first draft pick. Like, it's a pure socialist arrangement, right? In all of our sports leagues, that is considered fair play in the leagues. And so they are very anxious, all the owners are, to push the edges of it, but not to break through. And I agree that Steve Ballmer is an awfully bright guy. And I think it would be out of character for what he has done historically to a degree, right? So he also was a super aggressive CEO.
Yes.
And some of his decisions were what led to the government investigation. Yes. And you know, he cannot say that he is not known as an incredibly aggressive guy. And I was even told, and I don't know if you heard any of these stories, but I knew a couple of people who used to play in the noon basketball game.
It's Pro Sports Club. That might have been the morning game.
That could have been a morning game. I think it was a morning game. You're right. And that was like, you knew. It was sort of like the famous basketball game that the President Obama would have at the White. Like, you knew, like, a hard foul could be a career ender. You know?
Playing against the CEO.
You did not want to do that. You wanted to make sure he got his shots, he got his touches every single day.
It's really interesting because he is principled in my experience, but at times it feels like he can get himself into situations through his decisions. Yes, exactly.
He wants to win. And once he gets that hot on something, he's not a good guy to get in front of. And so is it conceivable that he saw a way to get this generational player with an existing knee injury? So that's also kind of a weird thing. I don't know.
Right.
I'm told the market was still hot for Kawhi Leonard. But it's an odd one because they wanted an extension with a guy who had just blown out a knee. Admittedly, a generational talent, but rarely do you come back from that in your 30s as the same person that you entered the interview with. Could I see a version of Steve Ballmer getting aggressive enough, really getting fixated on a player and being willing to throw some elbows to push the limits of what's allowable? I mean, you know him better than I do. I mean, you would probably say, no, you don't see him doing that.
I would have a hard time seeing it.
I don't know him well enough to say one way or the other, but I know from the outside looking in, always been a pretty aggressive operator as a business person.
So for people who are wondering, we've alluded to this a couple times. GeekWire did a podcast in partnership in 2018 called Numbers Geek with Steve Ballmer.
Right.
And the Ballmer organization called USA Facts sponsored that.
Right.
And it was all about government data and Steve Ballmer's take on it and where things were headed at the time. But one of the coolest experiences I had, and we've got a picture of it up here in the GeekWire offices, is I said, hey, Steve, if we're going to be doing a podcast with you about numbers, there is no way that I'm not going to be doing an episode on the numbers of the NBA. And so I actually got to sit next to him for one quarter. He gave me one period.
That picture is phenomenal, too. I love the picture that came with that story.
Chatting with him on the sidelines at the Clippers game. Back then it was at Staples Center. And the cool thing was, and this will be another shout out for the Microsoft people, make this even a little bit more tech oriented versus sports. The person that was sitting on the other side of him for that quarter was Dave Cutler. He is the father of Windows NT,
right,
which is the modern Windows
kernel. Didn't he
kernel.
end up getting mentioned when Acquired did the Microsoft history? Wasn't he mentioned significantly? That's where I know it from. It's from the Acquired podcast on Microsoft.
Absolutely, yes. Dave Cutler is a legend.
He's a legend,
at
yes.
Microsoft. And so in the picture that we've got on the wall, he's on one side, I'm on the other, and Ballmer is standing up in the middle of us screaming.
Which was Ballmer most of every game.
Yes. And I share all of that in the manner of disclosure. It was also a fun experience for me, but also just so folks know, I'm probably not the most unbiased source. Right. I do, though, feel that I have a little bit of insight just from interacting with him over the years and seeing how he carries himself and just also seeing the level of principle that he brings to the way he deals with people and his businesses and his sports teams. Mm-hmm. And it's certainly within the realm of possibility that this could have happened.
So let me ask
alleged,
you a
but
question.
I doubt that it did.
Do you think that I should go? I thought about doing this morning.
Yeah.
What I wanted to do this morning, and I forgot to because I was busy doing other things, was to set up a manifold bet on Steve Ballmer, innocent or guilty of salary manipulation, just for fun, just to see because I love the idea.
What the odds would be?
Well, on the crowdsourcing, like it was. Did you follow Manifold during the election? How much more accurate it was than polling? Fundamentally, that whole theory of how you can actually get to better numbers from a polling standpoint is doing essentially a gambling, even though it's not real money, doing a gambling website. I'd love to see what people have to say about Ballmer in this, but I don't know. I think that the correlation is very interesting and the league is apparently looking into it. The causation is going to be the magic pill, and I don't know that it gets there yet, but I guess we'll see.
Coming up next, I want to talk about the other big talker of the week, which was a very surprising acquisition by OpenAI in the Seattle region. That's coming up next. Welcome back. It's Todd Bishop. I'm here with Mike Lewis, journalist, tavern owner, radio host. Appreciate you coming on the show this week.
Happy to.
Primarily to talk about the Steve Ballmer news, but I cannot have this podcast this week without talking about the other big story of the week from our perspective. OpenAI, $1.1 billion they paid for a company called Statsig. And this is a company that was founded a few years ago by a former Facebook engineering leader by the name of Vijay Raji. And really personable guy, and he has built this company up. It's an A/B testing company. It's a product testing company, and so the core of their software suite is used by a variety of companies, including OpenAI and others, to test products. They'll put one version out or two versions out or multiple versions out. They'll see how customers react, and they'll use that data to inform improvements and new versions of their product. OpenAI made this announcement this week of this acquisition, and it was the weirdest acquisition announcement I've ever seen, because it did not start by saying, we've acquired this company for $1.1 billion. It said, we've brought on Vijay Raji as our new CTO of applications. And it was almost like an aside. As part of this,
Right.
we've also acquired Statsig for $1.1 billion. I mean, it's like the world is turned upside down with this AI talent market and everything else.
But there's a caveat in that 1.1 billion. It's stock.
It is all stock.
It's all stock. It's not a cash transaction. And so but if he gets 1.1 billion in OpenAI stock, I mean, that's not a bad long-term bet.
Exactly. And so there are a variety of investors in Statsig. Madrona Venture Group here in town is one of them.
They have to be very happy about this.
It's interesting because just in May, Statsig raised a new round of venture capital, and they became a unicorn at the time. In other words, $1 billion company in valuation. And their valuation was very specifically $1.1 billion. And so here we are several months later. And I was talking with my colleague John Cook about this as well. And it's like, why didn't they at least give him just a little bit of a premium? I mean, like throw him a bone. But essentially, what I think they were doing was betting that $1.1 billion worth of OpenAI stock, or whatever proportion they might own, is going to be more valuable than $1.1 billion of Statsig stock in 5-10 years or less.
I think that's a bet probably all of us would make. But I got a question for you. So what is the value of this product testing company to OpenAI?
It's a very good question. I think the answer is I don't know, but I would have to be convinced that it's of any material value at all.
So remember, there's been all kinds of talk all over the world in the tech community about these enormous Meta being sort of the primary focus of these talks, like how much money they are willing to throw. So
At people.
And so the idea could be here that this was a personal acquisition and not really a company acquisition.
In some ways, it's the quintessential acqui-hire, and it's an interesting twist given some of the things you're alluding to. You had, to your point, Meta going out and paying $100 million or more in salaries and signing bonuses up to $300 million. For example, there was an engineer, a very young AI specialist here in Seattle with a company called Vercept. He was poached by Mark Zuckerberg. And one of the questions is, why didn't Meta just go and acquire that company, get all of its talent, plus this star engineer, and do essentially what OpenAI did here? And frankly,
and that's kind of been Meta's history. Like Meta doesn't really develop much; it buys stuff.
Instagram, WhatsApp.
There you go.
Yes,
right.
Very much so. And so one takeaway from this is maybe OpenAI did the smart thing here in actually just acquiring this company. And then the other big difference is, you had Microsoft and Amazon do a variety of deals with a bunch of different companies. Probably the most well-known one was Microsoft bringing aboard Mustafa Suleyman and then doing a licensing deal with his company, which still exists in this kind of zombie form, although they would argue with that, I'm sure. But the difference is it seems that OpenAI can actually get away with an acquisition.
Right.
It requires regulatory approval, but they're not yet publicly traded, and they're not yet at the scale that Microsoft would be.
There's no antitrust worries. There's none of that stuff going on here, right?
Exactly. So just a really interesting twist. For me, it's a bit of a bummer in some ways. Statsig was number 5 on the GeekWire 200, our ranking of the top privately held startups in the Seattle region. And we always talk, John and I especially always talk about, where are the next big tech titans coming out of Seattle? And this was a company that at least had the promise of becoming that. And here they are getting scooped up for a valuation that's not anything above what they were valued at in their last venture funding round.
Right. Yeah. It's odd. And it's odd also that we're also in a place now where I think people are sort of existentially nervous. And I don't know that they're as interested in like running their own show. Things are getting, the rich are getting so much richer and so much more powerful that it's almost, you're just sort of angling on who's going to acquire you, but not if someone's going to, right?
Yes, that's very true. And to address your question a little bit more from earlier, I think there could potentially be value to OpenAI from Statsig, the company, but it's interesting that Statsig is basically going to stay on its own, operating out of its offices in the Seattle region. They're over in Bellevue. And there doesn't appear, at least on the surface, to be a real effort to integrate them. In some ways, I think it's almost like a talent pool that OpenAI could tap into even beyond Vijay Raji, the CEO. And to me, it's one of these interesting situations where it just illustrates kind of this upside down world that we're in right now with valuations and the long-term promise of AI.
My guess is sometimes people are getting purchased because you're worried about somebody else getting them, right? And that sort of forces your hand to get someone maybe you weren't even really prepared to integrate into your own work.
Yes.
Because you're just so worried about competitor A grabbing this person before you get a chance to.
The one last unique twist on this story, Statsig actually has made headlines for a completely different reason in GeekWire over the past year or two. They are hardcore, to use a Steve Ballmer term. They are hardcore about being in the office 5 days a week. When Vijay started the company, that was his principle. Even though it was in the pandemic, they had these really high-end filtration systems in their office at the time, and they've maintained this to this day.
Wow.
If you are going to work for them, you need to be in the Seattle area. It's kind of a throwback in some ways. I actually went out there.
That I didn't know. That's really interesting.
Yeah, and I got to see, they basically had a daily stand-up in the afternoon, and their engineering leader sort of tapped on a drum to get people to gather for the daily meeting. And it was really kind of like a blast from 2018, 2019.
Right. Yeah.
It was almost like being in an alternative universe. It'll be interesting to see if that culture stays as part of OpenAI and whether they stick to their guns.
Well, if he leaves his company, and ostensibly he will, I mean, he is essentially. I mean, if the theory is right that it was a purchase of him, not so much of Statsig. It'll be interesting to see if that culture maintains with him not being in the room anymore.
Yes. Well, Mike, thank you. Sitting here in your Santa Cruz Warriors NBA D-League final champions, 2015.
Only team to have had both a D-League champion and an NBA champion in the same year, yes.
As a fellow California transplant, I feel like this has been just a great melding of the minds on multiple topics.
Absolutely.
All right, that is Mike Lewis. Coming up next, the ironic twist for Microsoft in Google's antitrust ruling this week. A pivotal antitrust ruling aimed at addressing Google's search monopoly may have handed Microsoft its best competitive opening in many years, but it's still a slim one, and it's not clear if the Redmond company will even consider it worth the effort. A federal judge this week barred Google from entering into exclusive contracts that make its search engine the default on browsers and smartphones. Those deals include the search giant's long-standing deal involving Apple's iPhone. But under the ruling, Google can still spend billions to secure default slots, as long as partners remain free to preload or promote rivals. That leaves Microsoft to fight both Google's scale and its checkbook. So, as an additional fix, the judge also ordered Google to syndicate its organic search results and text ads to rivals for up to 5 years on commercially reasonable terms. For Microsoft, that could mean the ability to offer its users search results and ads that are backed by Google's industry-leading index. I spoke about the ruling this week on KUOW Public Radio with host Kim Malcolm, who picked up on an additional ironic twist in this story. Let's listen to part of that segment now.
And there is some irony here, as you point out in your piece, that, as you said, Microsoft faced its own antitrust lawsuit about 20 years ago about bundling a web browser with its operating systems. I mean, how should we think about that now, given where we are as we move forward into this brave new world?
It's really interesting because, of course, Microsoft is in many ways at least portraying itself as the victim here in this case. And the main precedent that the judge leaned on in this ruling was from Microsoft's own antitrust case. And of course, after Judge Jackson in that case long ago, Thomas Penfield Jackson, which was a name that was kind of like well known across the Seattle region at the time, even if it's been maybe forgotten to history for the current population. But after he ordered that breakup, it went through the appeals, and in fact, the appeals court, reversed that ruling and basically sent it back. And after that, Microsoft was able to reach a settlement. But the fact that there were not ultimately these structural remedies, in other words, this breakup of Microsoft into an operating systems and an application company, as the judge wanted to do back then, it set this precedent that the judge in this case was in many ways bound to go by. And so Microsoft dodging a bullet back in the day helped Google dodge a bullet today.
So looking forward, what are you going to be looking for? What signs are you going to be kind of searching for at Microsoft as it responds to this ruling now?
That's a very good question, because Microsoft has not yet said what it plans to do in response to this ruling. It's not said whether it will take advantage of the new data, of the new search results that could be offered to it under this ruling from Google. And it's a little bit of a prideful situation, I think, on Microsoft's part. Over the years, Microsoft has tried to get across, at least to the market, to consumers, that it feels like its search results and the quality of the things that you get back when you type queries into Bing are as good as you would get from Google. And that could be marketing and maybe not reality. But if Microsoft now goes and says, hey, absolutely, we want to be able to buy Google's results from Google, it kind of goes against that. And then the one other thing, and it's a big one to keep in mind, is artificial intelligence, because search is just completely different these days. You know, Google has largely shifted across the world to these kind of AI-driven search results, these summaries that come up from Gemini when you do a search. And obviously Microsoft is big into Copilot. And to a large extent, the search platform has become the jumping off point for the world of artificial intelligence. And in that way, it's not an idle question. This is not just history like Windows might have been back in the day, or Internet Explorer might have been back in the day in terms of Microsoft's antitrust case. This is a very real, very current question. And the question of whether Google can remain dominant in search will go a long way toward determining whether Google or Microsoft or Amazon or somebody else ends up being the dominant player ultimately in artificial intelligence. You can find a link to the full segment from KUOW in the show notes on this episode. Thanks for listening. I'm GeekWire co-founder Todd Bishop. We'll be back next week with a new episode of the GeekWire Podcast.